this is my reflective video for my professional industry project. First of all, on this presentation I used as part of my project, I introduced myself. I then set the lesson objectives in order to give the students a goal to work towards and enable them to know what the lesson was going to include. I asked the students to remove their mobile phones. This is mainly to help improve their concentration and therefore help their performance during the lesson. As a first task, I asked the students to write down the style of learning that they felt they learnt best. This task did need explaining, however then both groups 1 and 2 got on with it quite quickly. A lot of the students decided that they were actually 2 or 3 types of learners rather than just the one. The first task was based on the breeds and colours of horses and helped the students to identify different coat colours. I explained the rules below, however I did need to write these on the whiteboard behind me so that the students were able to keep track of the point system. In reflection, I'd make this much easier for students to understand. So a picture would appear on the screen like this, and then a box would be removed each time and the students would have to guess the colour of the horse. The same happened for 6 horses on 6 different pictures, and each horse was a different colour. I found that both groups maintained an interest throughout this task. However, I do think that it very much helped some students to stop rushing. I found that this task stopped students to rush because it meant that if they rushed, they may get the answer wrong. It showed them to think before they wrote an answer. He included both easy and hard pictures within this to suit each of the abilities of the individual students. So at the end I went through the answers. I found that both groups had a lot of correct answers and there was only 1 or 2 people in each group that got perhaps 1 or 2 answers wrong. Again, this taught students not to rush an answer and to give thought before writing an answer down. I then moved on to identifying different breeds. This task I found was much easier to explain for the students. It was a lot simpler and a lot better suited to their level of work. A picture would appear on screen and the students had to try and make an educated guess as to what breed the horse was. As I went through, in group 1 a lot of the pairs discussed the answers quite a lot more. However, group 2 started to chat about unrelated topics, which I had to put a stop to. I then went through the answers for this task. After I'd gone through the answers and the students had marked them, I flipped back through the pictures and just asked students to let me know what conformational traits each horse possessed. For example, they noticed that the Arab in this picture had upright pasterns, a dished face and often carried their tail high, as well as having a very slight frame. They did this for each of the horses. The next section was to identify face and leg markings. The students had a handout similar to this one here, however these blue boxes were clear for them. The students were given about 1.5 minutes to write down what they thought the names of each of the markings were. And here you can see at the bottom the point system was there was 1 point for each correct answer and minus a point for each wrong answer. As we went through, again, group 1 engaged in discussion quite a lot. However, group 2 again weren't quite so involved. They weren't quite so interested in this topic. Unfortunately, as well, group 2, I had to give a lot more extra time. There was 1 or 2 students that struggled quite a lot with this task. Not necessarily with the identification of the markings, but with remembering the names of the markings and remembering what they were called. However, once this task was completed and I went through the answers like so, I did find that a lot of the students did actually have the correct answers. However, there were 1 or 2 terminology problems which was sorted at the end when I went through this with the students. I then moved on to grooming. And I gave the students 30 seconds here to think of how many reasons they could think that a horse needed grooming. Group 1 came up with a lot more answers than Group 2. However, I did find that in Group 2, one pair of students said that they got quite a large number of answers, and then when questioned on this, it turns out that they actually had a lot less answers than they had in the first place. I feel that it was important to ask the students about these answers that they had, as I felt that they had been lying from the start, and I feel that if I had let them get away with this, they would have perhaps not took interest in the rest of the lesson. But like I say, most of the students, after they had decided upon their reasons for grooming, they all had good explanations as to why they thought that was a reason for grooming, and they did actually discuss, especially in Group 1, amongst themselves why they thought that was perhaps a good answer or a bad answer, which I felt was really good. It was really good to discuss between themselves. Okay, so then I moved on to when to groom. On this slide I put a few scenarios, and in the grey boxes, which covered up whether the horse would be groomed or not, the brown boxes just asked why. So, for example, the first one, horse is living out at grass, not rugged, and it has companions. I asked the students to discuss between their pairs whether they thought this horse would be groomed or not. We came to the conclusion that no, it wouldn't, and they then opened up the question as to why they thought that, and I had a very good explanation of most students about their reasoning, even if it didn't necessarily agree with mine. I did have a problem on this slide with that. The boxes didn't move out in order, as you can see. Unfortunately, this was only done due to time limitations of me not being able to double and triple check the formatting of my lesson presentation. However, other than that, I feel that the formatting and the style of this slide did work quite well. It split these tasks down into certain stages, which made it a lot easier for the students, especially those that were a little bit slower. I then moved on to grooming equipment. In this section, I picked a student's name and I asked them about one of these items of grooming equipment. They needed to tell me where they would use this item, where they would not use this item, and also what its main use was. As they answered, the boxes would disappear like so. Again, I had a technical issue with the sponges box and metal main cone box, and it's not disappearing. Again, if I had more time, this would have been checked doubly and twice again to make sure that the formatting was correct. Again, there was I think about one student that got one of these answers wrong. It was in regards to the sponges. They didn't quite know where you would and wouldn't use a sponge, but I found that in Group 1 their peers did actually help them out. They did discuss openly, they voiced their opinion voluntarily. I found this was really good. I think it really got the students discussing between themselves. I then moved on to a bingo task, and the aim of this task was really to increase the motivation for students. I found this especially good for the Group 2, as they appeared to be dropping motivation as the presentation progressed. So I felt this would be a really good thing to spark the interests again. The students' handouts had a 3x3 box on them, which required them to choose 9 parts of the saddle and write them in each of the boxes. In the next slide, I did have a list of parts of the saddle for the students to choose from. This made it a bit easier for those that didn't quite have as much of a good understanding as others. Unfortunately, due to time limitations, I didn't reread over this slide, and stirrup leather has been included twice. However, this didn't really affect the task at all. At the bottom of this slide, you can see that I've put for the first one to have all the boxes crossed off, to stand up and shout "I smell." I chose to include this instead of the students saying bingo, as I felt this would just spark a bit of interest, it'd increase the motivation and make the task a little bit more fun. In the end, this turned out quite well, as when the students did shout up to shout "I smell," there was quite a lot of laughter within the group, which helped to break down any confidence issues that some students had. I felt it really beneficial. So once the students had chose all their 9 parts of the saddle, I picked on students individually. I had a list of names on the board. I just picked names at random. That student would then come up and point to a part of the saddle and give me the correct name, and that item would then be crossed off the box of whoever has that in one of their boxes. This was done for first, second and third place, and after that I started to pick the students that had the most answers left to give them a chance at crossing some of their answers out. This did prove very beneficial, as there was quite a few students that didn't know where certain parts of the saddle were, such as the point of tree. So actually having a physical item there for the students to come and touch, look at and show around, it was really beneficial to show them where the point of the saddle was on a particular practical object. It was really beneficial to have a saddle there in person. This was the last task I included. Unfortunately, I didn't actually have time for this task due to both the groups being a little bit slower than anticipated. However, Group 1, I did manage to get them to briefly go over this second point on this slide. A quick discussion enabled them to outline a safe and suitable environment for the horses to live in, including the advantages and disadvantages of stables and field. This was in regards to the horses' health and welfare. Group 2, however, although I started this task, they lacked motivation, and after a very short discussion I stopped the presentation. Had I have known the students prior to this presentation, I would have been able to change the presentation, perhaps leave this task out, as I would have known that the students would be a little bit slower throughout, not giving me enough time for this. And really, as a whole, I think both the presentations went really well. Improvements for next time would definitely be a time run through, just to double check that all the formatting and timing was right and suitable. I'd also double check again for the formatting, and an improvement would be to know the students, perhaps observe them beforehand in order to get a little bit more of an idea about their personality and also what level they're learning at, to help me aim that towards them.